is out of session for the Thanksgiving break. But as you know, when lawmakers return, they will have a lot on their plate, you could say. Democrats will likely be busy mulling through Trump's tax returns now, but the Republicans will be preparing for their House takeover in just a few weeks. And already today, we're getting a better idea of what the GOP's strategy will be in 2023. Republican leader Kevin McCarthy's latest target is DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. McCarthy calling for him to resign over his handling of the border. And if not, he says Republicans in the House will start an impeachment inquiry. Meanwhile, today, President Biden will be discussing his future plans. He and his family landing in Nantucket last night, where he will spend the holiday. 2024 could be a topic of discussion at his Thanksgiving dinner table. They are staying at a luxurious $30 million compound on the island there. And as you can see, Hunter is in tow as well. Let's get out to Newsmax Chief White House Correspondent James Rosen, who joins us with more on the president's vacations plans and talks. And also, James, the White House responding to McCarthy's comments about Secretary Mayorkas already. Good to see you.
Indeed, Bianca, good afternoon to you. When President Biden left Washington yesterday evening, his job approval ratings remained historically low, with the latest surveys from ABC, NBC, Politico, Harvard, Marist, and Rasmussen all placing him in the low 40s, and Emerson, Quinnipiac, and Reuters recording favorable ratings in the 30s. Still, from his own perspective, the president feels the wind at his back. With the Democrats having exceeded expectations in the midterm elections, gas prices still high but down from a month ago, the economy as a whole still showing signs of growth and avoiding the dreaded recession, and as well a string of legislative victories that he can tout, including the placement of the first black woman on the Supreme Court. In Nantucket, Mr. Biden usually stays at the home of David Rubenstein, the billionaire financier and philanthropist. Last year, the Biden family getaway looked like this, with shopping excursions into town and a visit to St. Mary, Our Lady of the Isle Catholic Church. This year's holiday stretch is the period when the president has indicated the Bidens will make what he calls a family decision as to whether he will run for re-election in 2024, which he says it is our intention to do.
I think everybody wants me to run, but we're going to have discussions about it. And I don't feel any hurry one way or another to make that judgment, today, tomorrow, or whenever.
Another pertinent fact is that the president turned 80 this past week, a factor which he acknowledged in a recent interview is a legitimate concern for voters.
James Rosen live for us with the latest on the turkey talk over the table. Thanks, James. Well, let's bring in now Florida Congressman Byron Donalds, a member of the House Oversight Committee, who joins us to talk about this and so much more. Congressman, always great to see you. Thanks for joining me this Thanksgiving Eve.
Good to be with you. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Thank you. So we see the Bidens and Hunter there in beautiful Nantucket, where he'll be discussing, he says, a family decision. And you just heard him there, Congressman. He says he thinks everybody wants him to run. Not so sure about that. What's your take on if Biden will decide to go again and make another run for the White House in 2024?
I mean, look, I know there are a lot of Democrats that don't want him to run. But look, as a Republican, as a conservative, I actually hope he does. I think his record is awful. He's made all the wrong decisions. He's not been a very good president. We have issues all across the globe, all brought to us by Joe Biden. So as somebody who would be opposing him, I wish he would actually run. It would be a good thing. But let's be perfectly honest. They're going to make this decision. Is his age a factor? Not really. I don't think that's the factor. I think the more the factor is his health and his popularity within the Democrat Party. Are they going to want to move on? They're going to try to want to. But their bigger problem is there's no bench there. I mean, who are they going to run? Pete Buttigieg, Gavin Newsom, Kamala Harris? Come on. He might be the best they have.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about the growing Republican field in just a moment, too, sir. But I want to ask you about the Supreme Court recently clearing the way now for Democrats to get a hold of Trump's tax returns before the House GOP takeover. Trump has fought this. Clearly, this is not the way they wanted it to go. What is your reaction to that, and how damaging could that be for now candidate Trump?
I think it's damaging to the Republic. This is really not about Donald Trump per se. It's about Congress and committees of Congress, frankly, going way past their ability to subpoena information necessary to make legitimate decisions from a legislative perspective. If his tax returns can be subpoenaed like this, then basically every president and former president, frankly, their tax returns can be gotten as well. I think this is outrageous. This is a terrible thing to do. Listen, if people are concerned about Donald Trump paying his taxes, there's this thing called a tax lien. And tax liens are public information. So if you were saying he wasn't paying his taxes, the tax lien is all you need. You don't need the returns. This is the worst kind of politics. It is what continues to bring the divisions in our country. There's no need to do this at all.
And you know, Congressman Donalds, I have to bring up, last week I saw you right there in that huge press conference with James Comer, Jim Jordan, talking about the investigation that the GOP will be launching into Hunter Biden and possibly into, President Biden's connection with all these overseas business dealings. And they were very clear. You guys were very clear. You were unable to get suspicious bank reports. These are reports that were always available to members of Congress before Joe Biden was president. So it seems like there are a difference in priorities here where there are documents that used to be accessible to you, forget tax returns, and now you're blocked from them, and these could be very pivotal in this investigation.
No, it's very important to the investigation, and I want the American people to understand something. Whether it was President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, or President Trump, Congress had the ability to access suspicious activity reports. When Joe Biden became president of the United States, he changed the rules. Even Maxine Waters filed a bill to change it back. This is critical information. Most people might get a suspicious activity report one time in their life, maybe one. Hunter Biden and Jim Biden, the president's brother, have over 150. This makes no sense at all. So of course Congress should get this information, especially when Joe Biden changed the rules when he came into the White House. Conflict that with your last question, congressional Democrats wanting Donald Trump's tax returns. For what? Suspicious activity reports are something Congress should actually have the ability to view. Congress historically, no matter who the president was, has had the ability to review, but Joe Biden doesn't want that, so he changed the rules. This is the beginning of our investigations, and like I've always been saying, we're going to let the facts guide us. We're not going to do it like how the Democrats did, where you have a decision you want to get to, and you're just pulling information from everywhere to fill your narrative. No. We are going to follow the evidence. The evidence will guide our investigations.
And the microscope will be under that. And also, as we just saw from McCarthy yesterday, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Obviously, the border has been a huge concern as we see it now become an invasion. Every state is a border state. Here's a bit of what McCarthy said yesterday while he was traveling.
His actions have produced the greatest wave of illegal immigration in recorded history. Our country may never recover from Secretary Mayorkas' dereliction of duty. If Secretary Mayorkas does not resign, House Republicans will investigate every order, every action, and every failure will determine whether we can begin impeachment inquiry.
Congressman Donalds, do you think it will get to that, or do you think he will actually resign before that?
I think it could definitely get to that. I'm not sure if he'll resign or not. That's a decision for the secretary and also for Joe Biden. They got to figure that one out. But here's the deal. Alejandro Mayorkas has lied to Congress. He has repeatedly said the border is secure. It is anything but secure. And maybe their definition of secure is one thing over another. Maybe there's some legal fine points he wants to dance around. But the reality is that Joe Biden's policy, which Alejandro Mayorkas is executing, has led to more than 5 million people entering the United States through the southern border, which is an illegal point of entry. And they're going to try to use this fan dance of asylum to say that, they were acting within the purviews that the president has. I think it's a lie to Congress. It is outrageous. The American people see it. Mayorkas has major questions to answer. And listen, if things don't go well in Congress, that's his fault, not ours.
There you go. Want to shift gears a little and talk about some new numbers that have come out too. There's a new poll out by Emerson College. It shows the majority of voters would prefer Trump over DeSantis. Obviously in Florida, you know how popular DeSantis is, but this is some of the early polls. Of course, it's very early out of the gate. And there's a headline in Bloomberg today saying DeSantis won over Florida. Now he has the rest of the U.S. to convince. Now, we know DeSantis has not officially mentioned anything about a 2024 bid, but Congress Congressman, there's also some Republican leaders in Florida want to change state laws, basically saying if he did want to jump into the race, he wouldn't have to step down as governor, which signals maybe there is an interest here. What can you tell us about that?
Well, I think it's a lot of speculation, much more than interest. Obviously, Ron DeSantis is America's governor. He's done a tremendous job, and the people of Florida have rewarded him. But there's only one person running for president right now. That is Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is still the leader in the clubhouse, despite what anybody thinks or how anybody might feel. He's the leader in the clubhouse. And frankly, the nomination and the White House is in his hands. It's his to lose. And when it comes to state law in Florida, I'm actually somewhat familiar with this law. I left the state legislature to run for Congress. It's my interpretation that there doesn't need to be a law change in the state legislature. I think there's an exemption for running for federal office, and I definitely think there's an exemption if you're trying to seek the presidency. But there's a long way to go. Ron DeSantis has to actually demonstrate he wants to run for president. He has not said anything to that regard. He has been focused on Florida. As a Floridian, I'm actually grateful that he's done that. But until he makes those decisions, then we can really talk about this. Until then, Donald Trump is the candidate. He's the leader in the clubhouse, and we're going to see where the primary process takes us from there.
Interesting tidbit on that law, Congressman Donalds, and I'm sure it'll be much discussion over Thanksgiving tables this week about all of these political things happening. As always, sir, great to have you in. Thanks for your time today.
All right, thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.